was going to ask you, since you were mentioning sort of alternatives to writing about sort of important issues, I was going to bring up your handling of Hurricane Katrina in your novel. And sort of maybe what, if you want to talk about that, or if you're interested in talking about that, or maybe that might be an example of a way that, I don't know.
Sure.
That you can, or like, maybe I guess I'm curious as to like, why? Like, why bring that in?
Yeah.
And then maybe we can, or maybe you can talk about your process, either for that book, and then like maybe your process now, or how your process has changed.
Yeah, happy to. That came up in the process. It wasn't like what I set out. I didn't set out to write a novel about a family-run funeral home and Hurricane Katrina. That was not the plan. It was sort of one of those funny, sort of serendipitous things that happens in the writing process where I realized I was setting this action of this book in the summer of 2005. And, as we tend to do when we put things in a particular historical moment, you kind of like look around and, or what was happening then? And I was writing this in like 2007 or 8. It was only a few years later. But I realized, that was the really big thing that happened. And I remember how it took over all of our lives. I was living in New York at the time, and I swear I didn't get any work done that week. Like, it was just watching CNN, reading all the accounts and all the papers from the local, the Times-Picayune to the New York Times, like the whole thing. I think I went deep into that story. And I felt like everybody, in that moment it was a real kind of like collective national moment of failure, and I think we all felt the failure. We felt outraged at the authorities, and we felt, I think, personally culpable without even from great distances. I certainly did. I felt like, I felt this like terror, not because it would happen to me, but because it would never happen to me, and that was so unjust. And so anyway, so that, I like kind of took, when I got to that point in the book, when I realized that was the year we were working with, I thought, okay, so these people are engaged in their own story, which is emotionally and psychologically pretty fraught. We have a funeral, we have like characters who haven't seen each other in 8 years who used to be married. We have their daughter who's dealing with her own crap. And meanwhile, this major national disaster happens somewhere else. And like, how does that register on them? These people who are privileged and financially comfortable, but emotionally a wreck. How does that national political story register on their lives? And to what extent are they part of the shared collective that is culpable for it? And to what extent are they powerless witnesses? So it was just I found that a really interesting thing to register on to work through in the book, because that is how most of us experience national tragedy. Most of us are not a victim or a relative of a victim or a friend of a victim. Most of us are an audience, and we have to come to terms with our role as audience members. I think it's not a neutral role. So that was the big question, I think, that I was exploring with them in that book. It wouldn't have been right to have set it in New Orleans. That's not a story that I could have told. But I could absolutely tell the story of people who have it all and watch other people lose it. I don't know. That's where that came from.
Yeah. Would you talk a little bit about your process in writing that book, and maybe like how your process is now, or how it's changing with the new project that you're working on? Or how it was before you worked on that book, or published the book, or whatever. It's
such a funny thing, like, being a novelist, and being a young novelist, because I've only written, I guess I've written 2 now. I have a draft of a second book. But really, like, I've written 1 novel, and that took me 7 years, And so now I get to, like, say I'm a novelist because I wrote 1. But the first one is, like, just a experiment, really. Like, you're just like trying to figure out how to do it. You're like teaching yourself to write a novel the whole time you're writing the novel, and then you're correcting your mistakes, and you're asking new questions about like what a novel is. It's a very heady process. So for that one, it was a much more kind of like, I started with a like fascinating incident and situation for me, which is like a kind of like in the moment disillusion of a marriage, like a total breakdown of a domestic arrangement as an institution, you know, like an instance of that institution. And then I like was like, okay, so what would happen after that? And that was my novel, right? Okay, like what happens after that? But this time, I didn't totally start with a question in the same way. So I wasn't like searching for the answer as I was writing. I have a kind of I had an outline with like key nodes along the I guess I more have had a timeline with key nodes along the timeline. And my plan is to make each of those episodes the bulk of the novel, you know? So I felt a lot more comfortable writing with the plan the second time around. It was like, not only have I done this once, I can do it. I can probably do it again. But now I also have a plan. Like, this is so responsible of me. You know, like I will certainly get this done now. Of course, I still end up in lost in the wilderness at times. But it's a more orderly process on the whole. I think.
What do you do when you get lost in the wilderness? What is that wilderness like?
Cry, like complain to my husband. Eat cake.
Is it just like, is your wilderness like not knowing where to go next, or is it like not being able to get there in the way that you want to, or what is that lost feeling? Well,
the wilderness is a real place, and I think I use that term because for me it's often I find myself circling, and I don't know, like I'm off some path, right? But I'm also just frequently like writing a scene that I've already written somehow. It's like, it's different, like they're in a different place and it's different people talking and, maybe the incident that begins it is different, but it's like thematically, it's like the same scene.
It's like we've been here before, I know that rock.
So I just saw that rock, exactly. So that's why it's the wilderness. And I think that's what gets very like strange for me because, well, it's interesting to me that I am drawn back to similar themes. Like, what am I exploring here? Like why do I love like this pile of sticks so much? But it's not enough just to walk by it. You have to make it matter. And so for me, the question is balancing like, what are useful echoes? What are important resonances for a work to have, and what are me just spinning my wheels, and unable to like burst forward to that moment of insight,
What do you think are some of the things that you keep coming back to, or themes or ideas that whether you're sort of going there on purpose or like because you're obsessed with something and you're trying to figure it out, or because you're doing it subconsciously because you don't realize that this is a thing that's like you're trying to work out. Yeah. What are those things for you, do you think?
I have a lot of moments I keep stumbling upon where a character is like giving a lot of advice to another character, or like telling another character how it is, like what the world is like. And that's always that character's perspective, right? And it's so each time somebody gives a speech like that, there's like a different philosophy that's being imposed on the listener. But I wonder if that gets repetitive, if that gets like boring in a book to have mansplainers or didacts or whatever. Like, does that get boring? I don't know. But there's so much of it. I mean, we all spend so much of our time like listening to other people either tell their story or like tell you how to be. Especially growing up, there's so much advice about how to be as a student. And if you are a participant in any like strong institution, organization, particularly, there's a lot of know your role, talk and kind of like, contribute the best you can, to this team organization. I think that's very prevalent in our culture, in our working culture particularly. So I'm super interested in those kinds of narratives because I think they shape like all of our lives, whether we reject them or adopt them or push against them, but kind of like, inevitably accept them or let them bull rush us, either way. They really shape us. So like, that's a great theme. That seems, now I'm talking about it, I'm feeling really good about this. Like,
not so lost.
So this isn't so lost. This is like a really important thing for fiction to be addressing, but I want to do it in a dynamic way. You know what I mean? I don't want to bore
Not
myself.
Like a self-help kind of
Yeah, not in a self-help kind of way. I don't want it to be misread as self-help, and I don't want to bore my reader. I'd be interested if some readers read those scenes and actually listen to the mansplainer or the didact and are like, oh, that's good. I'll do that. I think that'd be fascinating. Of course, you can't talk to every reader, so you don't know. But yeah, that's one theme where I feel both lost and powerful at the same time.